Good evening. This is Before It Was Headlines, It Was Prophecy. And I'm your host, K.D. Elizabeth. So often I refer to America and Israel, actually predominantly I refer to these two countries, as the examples that we can see that the riders on the red horses have indeed been released. But throughout every show, I use those examples for two reasons. One, prophecy throughout Scripture always revolved around Israel. And two, I live in America and I can see what's happening. And I don't know for certain, to be really honest, I don't know that we get an accurate reporting of other countries. I really don't know that. So that's why we go from there. But tonight I do want to talk about a few things historically that are pointing to those four riders running across the earth. You know, historically, Europe is kind of the cradle of conquering for the betterment of another country, which, of course, the rider on the white horse, had a crown and a bow. So I truly do, and many scholars do interpret that to be being conquered for your own good sort of thing. And at one time it was said that the sun never set on the British Empire because literally it ruled over some part of every continent. And Rome, of course, predates Britain, and Greece before Rome. So Europe truly has been the cradle of that thinking, of making everything better by controlling it, by conquering it. Egypt was once the most powerful nation in the world, and, nothing was or has been more powerful than ancient Babylon. The Arab nations have literally written the book on wars and rumors of wars. So there's two examples between the rider on the white horse and the rider on the red horse that are clearly outside of Israel and America throughout some secular history bearing light to that. Now, as for famine and the cost of living, I find this interesting, and I talk about it a lot because I'm homesteading. And, Yudhevah told me to stand in the gap on behalf of the land. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm aware of that, where there are people, there's greed. And where there's greed, there's often abuse. And where there's abuse, there's waste. Because for whatever reason, enough just isn't enough. It's like there's an insatiability that comes along with the greed and the willing to abuse the land or other people or whatever. And it becomes an insatiable, perpetual thing. Waste perpetuates the need for more, which then sets the momentum in a downward spiral, as we're seeing. And that downward spiral leads to more famine and greater expense. I don't really think we've stopped to realize the difference in the cost of organic versus the unlabeled GMO mystery food. I don't even think we should call it food anymore. Mystery consumables. That's what I'm going to start calling it. And so, if we actually paid for real food, and real food only, the cost factor would soar, and so would the shortage. Because real food doesn't have a bizarrely extended shelf life, like what we see now. And it doesn't feel like wax. You remember when we were kids? And everybody's grandma and aunt and everybody had like this compote or some sort of, decorative bowl full of waxed fruit. Have you noticed? Go to the grocery store, pick it up. It feels the same. It truly does. So, at any rate, food grown naturally is not cheaper. I raise my own, so the expense is very minimal, but the labor is not. And, this is where America comes into play, and we don't have a lot of people that really want to do that kind of work. America has really taken great pride in getting away from manual labor. or even working with your hands for that matter. It was when I was going to school, everyone was taught, you know, we were taught that in education was like the opposite of working with your hands. And clearly we know that educations were pushed, you know, beyond, really almost exalted to an idolatrous level. I know it was an idol in my life for a long time. And that is not to say we are, you know, I'm not promoting being uninformed. But there is a difference between education and actual knowledge and wisdom. And at the time I was going to school, it was literally education versus working with your hands. So now that we've gotten away from that, nobody wants to do that. And now we've gotten all these huge educations and nobody can even find work. So that's an interesting conundrum that has just developed in the last, I haven't been out of high school 40 years. So if we consider the price we're actually paying with our bodies to ingest this consumable product that's being sold in the place of food, clearly the famine of nutrition has already tipped the scales of that rider on the black horse. Part of the obesity problem in America is one, our bodies don't know what to do, how to process a lot of the things that are consumed, therefore it's stored in the fat cells. The other problem is bodies continue to be hungry, so people continue to eat because it's poor nutrition. So America does lead the world in GMO and unnatural food production. The Goshen Gazette is expanding its natural food and natural wellness section to also include some warnings and some information about the not so natural things that we are consuming as well, or is at least being introduced. So the next thing which of course, you know, we've talked about the rider on the black horse almost every week. It compares to our GMO and our currency with no basis, which is a natural segue to pestilence and plagues, and that seems to really truly be a natural result of GMO food at this point. I mean, it's a very clear connect the dots, A to B, point A to point B. First, our GMO food is primarily manufactured, did you know, by the world's leading manufacturer of pesticide. So if the food is already made to kill what would naturally eat it, doesn't that sound like a platform for a plague or a pestilence? Or both? Because what we're actually doing is making ourselves sick, and and I'm sure it's doing some amazing super mutant things to the natural, you know, what would naturally eat those vegetables, if they were real vegetables anymore, or fruit. So we've got a real strange paradox building here. Our bodies can't handle it, but the lower organisms will probably mutate to keep surviving it, you know. Cockroaches have been around a long time. Now, there is financial motivation for these present conditions. And that also is a frightening point A to point B. Remember, the love of money is the root of all evil, Scripture tells us. Which is why humanity continues to choose to ignore the warnings provided by the evidence of these riders on the four horses. I would urge you to do a simple, very simple Google search of G.D. Searle Company. That's the initials G.D., capital S-E-A-R-L-E Company. It's no longer in business technically, but it would amaze you at the connection that is made and what has happened to that company and the subsidiaries listed beyond that company. Find out how many pharmaceutical subsidiaries are owned by the same company that has patented GMO crops. That's what the history of G.D. Searle and Company will tell you. So, keep in mind, the four riders have been released by Messiah. So that means it is still a piece of taking care of his people. That's still a piece in the puzzle here. It's to give warnings of things to come. These 4 horsemen are not bringing all of this horribleness upon us. There's more to come. These are the warnings. Yes, peace has been removed from the earth, but Yeshua already said that was going to happen. They're not coming to destroy the world or God's people. As a matter of fact, they're released before. Even before Yud-Heh-Vah-Heh tells the angels to hold back until the mark of his people is made clear. So, we can heed the warning and be ready, as Messiah told his followers to do, or we can continue to be dependent and feign ignorance. The good news is God doesn't want us to be ignorant. So he made sure the prophecy was recorded by John, and he's calling many of his servants to sound the warning. This has been one of them. Before it was headlines, it was prophecy. I'm Katie Elizabeth.